So let's talk about UI. Remember I said one of the biggest differences between regular Java and Android is the UI. So that's where like we have a lot of new stuff. So with that, I want to let's talk about the UI in Android, because that's a big part of what app development is about. So the biggest difference is there's basically two ways, so not one way, but two ways to develop UI in Android. Okay. So the way number one is to do it declaratively. So what that means is that you are writing XML code, right? And it's very much it's similar to HTML. I guess, has anybody created HTML page before, like back in high school? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, but you know what I mean. Like, and Dreamweaver doesn't count. I mean, HTML, like as in you use Notepad or favorite, IDE or editor. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it is procedurally. You code it. You do it by writing Java code. Okay, and that's pretty much very similar to what AWT and Swing look like in Java. In other words, it's a lot of code, lots of typing. Right? So the way we're going to do it is we're going to use both ways. So we're going to start here. Okay, this is going to be our number one, and then we're going to go here and we're going to finish it off here. That's sort of the approach that we're going to take. Okay, let me kind of explain that another way. XML is really good for describing what a widget looks like. Take a button, for example. XML is a great tool to describe what button is going to look like, what its content is going to be, the color, the size, the roundness, whatever it is. All right. XML allows for tools to do that. So you can have tools that look like Dreamweaver to create UI. But XML is not the right tool to say what the button does. You can't easily say do this when you clicked, right? When you clicked. So that's where we're going to switch to Java, and Java is going to be what we program the button in. Does it make sense? So you do a lot. You go as far as you can in XML, then you switch over to Java. That's our essential.
It's more like action. Java.
Exactly. Exactly. Java is for action, and then XML is for description, look and feel. Cool. Okay, so we're gonna start a new project, and we're gonna then start working on new UI. So I'm gonna start this project that I call Yamba. Let me just, I already have some Yamba. I'm just going to move this Yamba to Yamba old. Refactor, rename. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to close everything here. And I'm going to start a new project. I'm going to call it Yamba for yet another microblogging app. You guys can call it whatever you want, but let's create a new project. Okay, new Android project. As I said, I'll go Yamba. Gonna be my project, and I'm gonna base it on. Should I try Android 9? What the heck? Android 2.3. I haven't written anything on Android 2.3, so might as well give it a shot. So but it doesn't really matter what stuff that we're using, API that we're using. It's pretty much hasn't changed since Android 3 or something, right? So don't sweat it. Like, you don't need the latest, greatest or anything like that, right? So, so yeah. So application name, I'll say Yamba. Package name, I'll use com. I'll use com Yamba to keep it short. but I don't think there's Chromium. But don't, yeah. You know what I'm gonna do? Learning Android.yamba. There. That's my that's the book domain name. So what the heck? Might as well. Create activity. I'll create an activity. So we're gonna start before you finish that. So we're gonna start with and let me open the picture like this. I have pictures that may make a little more sense. So images. So our final product is gonna look like this, right? So it actually looks kind of bad on this, but we're gonna. Our final product is gonna look like this, but we're gonna start here, okay? And I call these. See, I use a certain naming convention. You don't have to use this naming convention, but I usually say the name followed by what it is. So, for example, if it's an activity, it's gonna be something activity. If it's a service, it's gonna be something service. Right? If it's an adapter, it's going to be something adapter. That way, when you have a bunch of stuff all in the same folder, it's easy for you to figure it out, okay? So that's basically how I typically do it. So this is status activity because this is going to be the one where you update your status. Remember, it's got a big box and a button on which you click and you press it and it says click update status, okay? So that's why it's a status activity. So I'm going to start with that one. That's going to be our number one. It's going to be this one, and it's going to update. I'm hoping to get up to here today, right? So we update all that to the screen. So back to this, I'll say status activity. Okay. And then minimum SDK version is gonna be, it doesn't really matter. I'll go back to 4 just because I want to be able to run it on my old school HTC Dev 2 device, which is loaded with Cup Donut 1.6. So with that, why is it not letting me do? It doesn't like that? Huh. Interesting. Okay, so I'm just gonna do that dot maracana dot. It doesn't matter what it is. You guys can use your own, right? But it's interesting that it doesn't allow for dashes.
Why shouldn't it? It's just to develop.
That's a great question. Why shouldn't it allow for dashes? I will show you another place where it doesn't allow for dashes. There is a place where it doesn't allow for dashes. And yeah, and I'll show you that later. Okay? Bam, finish. It has one of the reasons why it has to do with how it manages the resource files, and the dashes become minuses in Java. It's kind of weird, but I'll point that out later. Okay. So we now have a project. Again, everything came from a boilerplate. So this is boilerplate code. There's our R file that's generated. There's our resources that are generated. So far everything looks pretty much the same as before, right? Now. It created a default file for us, main XML, right? Which is with our main layout. But I don't like to call it main because we're going to have multiple layouts. So what makes this one main, right? So I'm going to rename it to status to respond to the status activity. I just find it more meaningful. And in Eclipse, to rename something, there's no such thing as rename, but you do a refactor. Rename, okay? Because Eclipse does a little more than just rename. It actually checks for references where applicable. Now that doesn't mean that it always works, but it does do something more than just rename it. So I'm going to simply rename it to status status.xml. Okay, just name change, and this should break your project. Did it? Yeah? Yeah, so see how you get all this XXX, right? That means compile time error, syntax error, right? Now, these are easy to find when it's Java. It tells you exactly, drill down, open up status activity, you find another X, and it spells out what the problem is. Our layout main no longer exists, right? So the moment you change the file, that moment R got regenerated and recompiled. So reference to something that's R layout main is not valid anymore. So you just basically delete this, click on dot, and see Eclipse now tells you what's available there. So you can now just use Eclipse to complete this and change basically main to status. Save it, and everything gets recompiled and rebuilt. And your project should be whole and complete, working, right? So the point with this is just kind of how do you trace Java errors. That's point number one. You drill down through the little X's. But the point number two is, remember I said R is in one ugly file. We're not going to look inside of it, but we're going to use it. And the way we're going to use it is by, you don't have to do this, but if I just wanted to refer to something, I would say R dot, and then you wait and Eclipse gives you options, right? And you say, layout dot, and you wait and Eclipse gives you options, and bam, you complete it that way. Okay, so doing it this way, it's much smarter. A, it's way quicker for you. B, it avoids typos. So it's actually I recommend it to use the self-completion in Eclipse, because that way you're going to avoid some typos otherwise, and you'll be like, oh, why is this not compiling this and that?
So when you change from the main to status, R automatically updated. Why not SRC? Why not source didn't update?
Which source? Oh, why didn't it update here?
Yeah.
Well, that's, you would expect that to work, right? Yeah, it's a bug. It's not complete. Normally, see, Eclipse tools are still rudimentary. Like in Java, if you do something refactor rename, it actually does way more updates. But for this particular thing, it doesn't. Yeah, it's. I'll show you where the source code for it is if you want to fix it at some point. Or file a complaint. Ask for the money back. Okay. By the way, I'll be showing you some very cool, Eclipse features as we keep on going. So you'll see some shortcuts along the way. Okay. So far we're just back at square one. We haven't done anything. We created a project, renamed one file. Big deal. So let's take a look. Where we're going to start is back again here, right? So we said this is a good location to start. We're going to start declaratively first, and then we're going to switch to Java. So that means let's open up that status XML file, which for now is just big or not so big black box. Everyone got it? Okay, so first of all, this is sort of new. It wasn't like this before, but I updated my tools for Eclipse, so it looks slightly different than what may look for you. But here it says basically how you're looking through this, what the resolution, and I'll just make it.
It just lets us pick devices, so watch doesn't matter.
It lets you pick a device. Yeah, you can pick a device. That's kind of, I guess, a little better than picking the So this would be like, for example, Nexus 1. But see, it doesn't fit in my screen. So I really just don't care. I just want something that sort of looks squarey and sort of fits in my screen. But you can kind of adjust it. You guys, because sometimes if you're working on a specific device, like a square screen or something like that, this can be helpful. Okay? You can change if it's landscape or portrait view that you're looking at, and so on and so on. Okay. Now, one thing that I do want you to set up in terms of the environment, when I work on the UI, I find it very useful to open up these two windows on the side. One is outline and the other one is properties window. Okay, so outline and properties. So if you're using my virtual machine, you already have it configured that way. You don't have to do anything.
No, where do you see that?
So it may be closed like this. So if you're using a virtual machine, you should have something like here, right? And you can click on this and that expands it. Right, again, so it's here and it expands it. For those of you who are not using a virtual machine, you probably have properties open, but you have it open down here. Yeah? No? Okay. Okay. Okay, or you don't have properties open at all. So here's what you do. Whenever you're missing one of these windows, there are a zillion windows at your disposal, but they're not obviously all shown because there's not enough screen space. So whenever you're missing a window, you're going to find it under Window, Show View, and then if it's not in this list here, then it's going to be under Other. So Window, Show View, Other, and then Properties is under General. So click on it and it should open for you this time around. Yeah? Now, it probably opened it for you down here. So you can drag it like that, and put it here, right? So you can see how you can drag it? Okay. So you can put it here. And you probably want to adjust the width of property and values, because I bet you your properties box column is super stretched right now. Make sense? See how I want to have, it's a name value pair, so I want to kind of adjust my columns so they fit, right? So that this is my property column and then this is my value column. That's how I like it. So when I click on one of the components, I can see the values and everything kind of nicely fits more or less. Right?
Where do you get all this properties?
Well, you gotta select an element first. So everyone got it? That's how I like to set it up, my environment. And yeah, and they changed this tool a little bit, so it may take me a little while getting used to it myself, but I'll point out what the changes are. Okay, so what we have here is we have a whole bunch of widgets. Widgets are properly called views. Let me just kind of explain what that means in Android. I'm going to fast forward to this slide. Bam. So what we have is you basically have, think of it as kind of like Lego blocks, right? Like you have Lego blocks that are that represent something on a screen. And that something can be one of the two things. It could be something that can contain other things, or it can be a thing. In other words, it could be like a branch or a leaf, right? In other words, it can be you know, a layout, meaning a layout is a placeholder for other things, versus a thing would be something like a button. Does that make sense? So a placeholder is not really necessarily visible itself. It's more used to hold other things, like container in Swing. Yes, it's what in Java we call that container, and we call an actual view a component. And containers are components. Similarly, layouts are views. It's just that there are special kinds of views that can contain other views. Or it's a composite pattern if you guys are familiar with design patterns, right? It's It's you can compose like many of something is also a something, right? Does that kind of make sense? Okay, so basically the way we're building the UI is by putting mixing layouts and views on top of each other, right? Cool. So right now, what we have here is you can kind of see in the outline, it kind of shows you have a linear layout which contains a text view. Linear layout contains a text view. Oops. And I'm going to change this theme from for you guys to see from theme to theme light. And like I said, it doesn't really do much other than make it on the screen better. There is something called themes. But this is not how it works. I'll show you how we define a theme and all that.
This is just display theme, right?
Yeah, this is just merely for what's visible here.
So it doesn't get saved to the application.
Exactly. When you run it, it's not going to be applicable. But there is a way to create themes that are essentially like style sheets in Java, in CSS, right? And we will work on that as well. So, so you can kind of see that right now I have one thing there. It's called a text view, and it's contained within a linear layout. Essentially, I have two components. Okay, so let's kind of let me kind of open up that application that I had before. Let me look at this screen right now. So if it doesn't mean that you always have to build something like this, but this is a very simple UI. So let's kind of look at this UI. How many things do we see on this UI? How many components do you guys see on this UI?
5.
Yeah, I think the correct answer is 5, but let's count it. So we have the mother of everything, which is the box that holds everything, aka a layout, right? So that holds everything. Inside of it we have a title, right? We have this thing here, this is the count, you know, as you type it kind of goes down, right? Then we have the area where we type stuff, okay? Make sense? And then we have the button. Those are roughly the components. So they have different types. So the ones that contain just text, we call them text view, right? The one that is editable text, we call it edit text. Okay, button is just a button, and so this would be a text view as well. So let's not worry about this one for now. We'll get to that later. So we have a text view followed by an edit text followed by a button, right? So far so good. So to recreate something like that, what I would do is we already have a text view, and you can kind of see it here in the outline. This kind of shows you the outline of stuff, right? So I have an edit text. I have a text view. Then I would find an edit text, and I would drag and drop it. Okay. And then I would find a button, and I would drag and drop it. So there are my 4 components, right? So mother of everything, text view, edit text, button. And you can also see here, mother of everything contains 1, 2, 3 components. See how they're nested inside of it.
In your case, I think we need an image button, right?
It doesn't matter. We can go with the button and then put a source. Yeah. Yeah. Well, we can you know, yeah, we can change that later. It's not a big deal. So it doesn't look that great, but at least structurally we have the 4 things that we need. That's how I would start. Okay. So everyone good so far? Okay. So now what I would do is I would adjust properties of those things. So let's start with I don't know. Let's start with the second one. No, let's start with the third. With the button. It's the easiest. So select the button. Select it by clicking on it. So it's you know, it tells you that the button is selected, or you can select it here. It doesn't really matter how you select it. Now, if I open up the properties, you're going to notice that there's 1,000,001 property for the button. Okay, there are quite a few things. And by the way, the best documentation probably is Eclipse, by putting a mouse over it and kind of trying to figure out what is what, right? It's easier than reading the documentation. But out of these zillion properties, how do you know which ones you care about? Well, I kind of intuition, or I kind of gave you a little cheat sheet. So these are the ones you kind of care about. So these two you almost always universally care about: layout width and layout height. Okay, that essentially tells the parent how much space to reserve for you, the component.
You should that's what the phone is called.
Layout width and layout height. It's under MISC, so it could be hidden sometimes. If you, yeah, especially on Ubuntu, that tends to be closed down, that little box. I don't know why. Yeah, so layout width and layout height. So let's take a look. So under miscellaneous, find layout width and layout height for the button. And for example, for height, you know, I could put something like, I don't know, 200 px, right? And there's my button now, 200 pixels. Woohoo, right? Now, what is a problem with that? There are a bunch of problems with that. Why is this a bad idea, 200 px?
Doesn't scale to different screens.
So 200 pixels won't scale to different screens. Okay, so let me explain the units first, and then we're gonna come back to this. So units in Android UI. Okay, so you all know what pixels are. You all know what inches are. Some of you heard of millimeters? Yeah? I'm just kidding. Points, everyone knows about points, right? Now this is basically what's new in Android, except these two are identical, DP and DIP, right? So really, there's only two new things. So DP is a density independent pixel. What that means is if you have a screen of 160 dpi, then they're equal. Right? If you, so 160 dpi is low density. So if the screen is 240 dpi, then you know that would translate into 50% more pixels, right? So in other words, if you wanted to scale it properly with the screen density, right, you would simply forget about pixels from now on and just change that to DP. It's very simple. Whenever you use pixel, there's really no good reason for you to use pixel ever again. Use DP. That's easy. Okay, and it's a real problem. Like this screen is 160 dpi. This one is 240. Right. So everything, if I use pixel, everything will just shrink automatically on this screen. Right. Plus, it's a bigger screen, so you have quite a big problem. Right. So that's it. And then SP is basically a scalable font. So if I say something is 30 SP, then that would normally be 30 dp. But if a user says, I like everything extra large because I'm kind of blind, right? Then 30 SP may translate into 50 dp or something to accommodate user's preference. So you may or may not care about user's preference. For example, I may say buttons, I'm going to acknowledge user preference, but like title, I'm not, because that messes up my layout or something like that, right? So it's up to you. So the bottom line is one approach better is, as opposed to 200 px, is to do 200 dp, which basically would automatically adjust for the density. See how it became a little smaller. However, we're not going to even do that, because what's 200 dp on this phone versus 200 dp on a Google TV, 1080p, you know, large screen 65-inch TV, it's not the same. Like this app would like look like a tiny little blob in the top left corner of my Google TV, right? It wouldn't look good, right? And plus, try to use the thing to navigate to that. It'd be like a nightmare. I don't know if you guys try that. It's really hard. So you want everything to adjust proportionally for the large screen. So to do that, what we're gonna do is we're gonna use, as opposed to hard-coded numbers, we're gonna use one of these following two. Wait, I said two and there are three. It's really two. Fill parent and match parent are basically the same thing. They just switched to match parent as of 2.1, I think, or 2.2. But they basically is just a new name for match fill parent. So I tend to use fill parent as opposed to match parent for backwards compatibility. So what that means is take all the space that's available to you. What wrap content is take only as much space as you need. So one is super greedy, the other one is super generous, right? So for example, the height of this button should be what? Should it be fill parent or wrap content? Yeah, if I did fill parent, see how it takes all the space. That's not what you want. So I'm gonna do here. I'm gonna do wrap content, and now it just takes vertically as much space as it needs. And then for the height, for the width, I'm gonna say what? Yeah, because we want to stretch it sort of like that. Again, you may have a different idea what your UI looks like, but that's what I'm gonna use to demonstrate. So far, so good? Okay. So now, that one is fine. Notice what I'm going to do is I'm going to do multiple passes through these components. So first I just drop them onto the screen, right? So second pass is to adjust fill parent wrap content. Third pass is going to be to adjust text. Fourth pass is something else, and so on. So I'm going to do this. It's going to slowly get looking better and better, right? I find that sort of tends to work well approach. Okay, so I'm going to pick the second one, which is the text area, right? So that one, if you remember, we wanted to kind of take as much space as we want in the middle of our screen, right? We kind of wanted it to, take that entire middle of the screen. Okay. So what's going to be the width of it? So the width is going to be fill the parent, fine. What about the height? Okay, so let's take a look. So now fill parent, bam. And what happened? It did fill the parent, but what happened to my button? So the point with this that I wanted to come across is that with fill parent, the order of children matters. In other words, sucks being the youngest child, right? You get pushed out, right? So I always knew that was the case. So what do you do about that? Well, one thing that you can do is you can say you can use the weight. And the weight is, let's see if there's a better explanation what the weight is. No, see, there's never documentation for any of this. Weight is one of the components that I kind of I'll mention here. It's basically how greedy or generous a widget is on a scale from 0 to 1. 0 means don't care about anyone else. 1 means fully, obliged to everyone else. And it can be anywhere in between. So if you wanted two components to fight for the same space 50-50, then you could just give them the same weight and they can share. They both say, oh, I want all the parent space. I want all the parent space. Okay, how much do you want? How much, So you can kind of use those numbers to kind of adjust 60-40, 30-70 ratio and so on. But in this case, I'm just going to say I'm going to fill the parent, but I'm going to be fully generous to everyone else who also needs space. So I'll put number 1 there. Default is 0, so that's why it didn't care about anyone else. So that gives me that kind of fill the place, but leave others as much space as they want. Cool. And finally, the top guy, it's pretty fine the way it is. It's, you know, I don't have any complaints about it. Other than one minor thing I would do is I would like to center that text. That's going to be my title, right? So I would like to center it. It's sort of, I would like it to look like this in the middle, right? Now, the word for centering or alignment is gravity, okay? It's just a funny way of saying alignment in Android. So the question is, how do you adjust gravity? And there are two ways to adjust gravity. Well, if you look at gravity, you'll find two gravities in the zillion and one property here, right? Look, there's something called layout gravity, and then there's something called gravity, somewhere here, gravity. So which one? So layout gravity says how this component is laid out within its parent, versus gravity is how is the content laid out within the component. Okay, so in other words, if I try to see this blue box, if I try to center the blue box within its parent, what is it going to do? Well, but it doesn't have a lot of space to maneuver. So centering it, it actually doesn't do anything because it's already centered. The box is, you know, it's like you took all the space and now you're trying to center yourself within the space you already took. It's like not a lot of space to maneuver. So that doesn't really do much, right? In this case, we want to position the content within the box, and that's the other gravity. So, by the way, for those of you who are not using Ubuntu, you can click on a ... and choose center, and that will just do it. For those of you who are using Ubuntu, we know you like to type, so you go ahead and type center. The ... doesn't work, or hasn't worked until, you know, recently, but there is a new version just released today, so something to test out. Okay, so the point is, if one gravity doesn't work, try the other. You know, it's another way of thinking about it. Okay, so we now have this layout, right? It looks like this, pretty much. Now, what we would like to do is, let's do some cosmetic changes. So first I want to make the size of the text larger, right? But then I also want to change the content of the text, okay? So let's start with this guy now. So let's start with the content. So you would probably figure out that there's something called text, and that's probably content, right? For that one. And for the text, I could type status update, and boom, that works. But that's not a good practice, right?
String and string not because like add string and then the
Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm just going to explain that. Yeah, exactly. So just like we moved English, quote-unquote English, from Java to strings XML. Similarly, we want to separate the concerns of the XML files. So this file that we're working on is a layout file. Its concern is the layout of the screen. It's not concerned with the language, right? So we should still keep language in strings XML and then layout in layout. You actually want to separate them. Okay, although not separating it will work, as you can see. That does not will work. That works. By the way, if you try to put a code like this into the source code repository to compile, it's gonna fail because they run some kind of blend, some kind of, you know, to check the validity of code, and that that breaks it. But it does work on the development environment. However, I just briefly noticed during lunch that one of the things that they mentioned in platform is the support for pro. Where's the what is it? This thing, ProGuard. I thought I saw it. Anyway, so that's something that I'm not sure exactly what it does, but
It shrinks the job file.
oh, that's just the obfuscator, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but does it do any length type checking on the code itself? You don't know. Okay, it doesn't matter. There is this file ProGuard that's now supported. So optimization passes, don't use mixed case class names. See, well, this is all just how to optimize it, keep public classes. Yeah, this is just the obfuscator so far. Anyway, the point is that we shouldn't be using names like that status update. So in other words, what you want to do is you want to define your text in strings XML. Now, the long way of doing it is to open up strings XML, right? Click on add and create a new string. So click on add, click on string, and then I would type in something like title status update, and I would say status update. I like to also prefix my name value, my strings, with what they are followed by the name. But just because this is a pretty flat list, right? So over time, you're going to have 20, 30, 50 different strings in this file, right? Because it's all flat. So otherwise you wouldn't know, so you may not know how it's all organized. Okay, that's why. So this is a long way of doing it, okay? And now you'd go to status update here, and then under text you can select ... and then pick it from this list, and then status update. Right? The shorter way doesn't work or didn't work in Ubuntu, and that's to click on the ... click on add new string, and then you can quickly use this to add and choose right away. So you don't have to open up separate window for blah 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 for status update, for strings and so on. But anyway, that's my text. If you want, you can change its size to like 30 dp, for example, to make it really big. You know, text size. Okay. That's about it. I mean, we can do some other cosmetic stuff later on. Yeah, it's oh yeah. So let me explain this, since we use the little ... which doesn't always work. Add string says look at strings XML. Yeah, and then this is the actual name or key of the string. So it's always going to be add string / and then something. Yeah. Works? Yeah. Okay. So, everyone done with that one? Okay. So the next one is this one, which is our edit area. And we probably don't want to have a default text, right? Because default text would mean you have to kind of like delete it first before you can start typing it, which is very annoying, right? But there is something useful, in here, which is, see, what I have here, please enter your blah blah blah. That's not a default text, that's a hint. So when I click on it, it just start typing hello, it just disappears. right? So that's called a hint. So what I'm gonna do in our example is I'm gonna find text. I'm gonna get rid of it first. So now there's no text. Just delete it. But then I'm gonna find something called hint, and I'm gonna enter a new hint. So I'm gonna click on the this time dot new string, and I'll say hint status, and I'll say something like please enter your status message. Right, so this is that quick and enter into, right? So just specify the name and then the value. It's kind of the name value is kind of reverse. Then it adds it, and now I can choose it. And now you can see how it says add string / hint status, and you can see that there's please enter your status message there. Hmm? Yeah. Yeah. So this would be the key. This is the key, and this is the value. So it's reverse. So this is going to be r.string.something, right? That's why it's kind of like that. But this on Ubuntu has issues. So you may have to manually go into string.xml and add it. Did it work?
How do you turn on the UI hints?
The UI hints?
You know how it says Android text
Oh, this?
dotted, yeah.
Oh, I just upgraded my Eclipse tools to ADT version 8, which is needed by Gingerbread. Yeah, so I just ran that upgrade during lunch. So first time I see this. I don't necessarily think it's more useful, because I really don't know, but oh, cool. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, that's what it looks like. Can I turn that off? No. Okay, so far so good on this. Please enter your text. Alright, so let's do, you guys do the same for the button. So we're gonna change the text of the button to something like button update, which we already did. So I'm gonna do it quickly because we already did this. Tip tip. I'm gonna change the size of the text to text size on like, I don't know, 25 dp. Bam, saved. A what?
Can you pull up the property? Or you see where you change the page for the button? Yeah, this one.
Click on it.
The property?
The formatting?
No, the property.
Oh, the property.
Yeah, where you change the
Oh, that property? Oh, okay. But make sure, I mean, this is only going to work if that's how you define it in strict XML, right? Right, you guys get that, right? So this points to strings XML and then this is going to be a name of a property in Strix XML. So otherwise it's not going to work. Right? So far so good?
To update to 2.3 now that I'm just curious, under installing software?
Yes, if you wanted to, you would go help. You can go check for updates actually in Eclipse. Help, check for updates, and that should check for updates to everything. Yeah. And for me, it's nothing to update.
Can I see the same extent also?
You can. So let me show you this way because it's more accurate. So that's that one. So it must exist under that name. For that to work out. Got it? So when you save everything, everything should compile. You should not have any red X's. Right? Okay, so is everyone pretty happy with the way things look graphically? Again,
What is Eclipse trying to say on the left in the tree? It says some S and some F next to all the R, but all the resources from the right hand. What does it mean?
where you see that?
It's okay, can
Okay. So far so good? Hmm? You cannot undo what?
Okay.
Let me just check. No. So you can say
Can I put the distance or result?
well, you can add it like this. You can click on add and you can add like this string, or you can type it, or you can double check. So button update, right? And then you can put a value. It doesn't really matter what it says update. Right? Control S. There's no save button unfortunately here. Okay. So now when you go status, you can for the text, you click on dot dot dot. You can't. So you're gonna do add string slash button update. Okay. Yeah. So this one, we want to make it bigger. So let's go down. Okay, we remove the text, we have no text for it. Yes, and then we put hint. Let's see hint status, that's fine, but it doesn't exist. So you just need to define it here by saying add, and then another string, and the name is hint. That right, Control S to save it. Yeah, so, and this one you don't need, right? So you can delete it. And then this one we were going to change to some text, right? Some different text. So same idea, just what we did 2 or 3 times, right? So it's not hello, but it's going to be another something else.
just update and not
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, how come I cannot see?
Because your text is outpowering it. So delete text.
Delete which one?
Text. Go find property called text. Here, find property called text. Go down, it's alphabetical, so it's going to be on the T. Yeah, just flip,
Yeah, delete this one.
yeah, just do it.
Oh,
Everyone got it? Okay. So now, we pretty much. Any questions, no? Okay, so we pretty much have this UI. I mean, there's more cosmetic stuff we can do, but let's now look at what the next step is. So let's just say we're happy cosmetically how far we got it to, right? So we are sort of done with number one, okay? So now we're gonna do number two, right? We need to program the button. We want to do something when the button is clicked, okay? So out of this four elements that we have, which ones do we need to care about programmatically? Okay, so this one and this one, yes? And we need to know programmatically what's typed into this box, and we need to know programmatically when the button is pressed, right? We programmatically don't care about the title nor the layout because those things are just there for cosmetic purposes, right? Okay, so another important component for out of this, so you saw layout height, you saw layout width, weight, gravity, and text. The only one you haven't seen so far is this one here, ID, okay? So this one. And ID is a unique identifier, okay? And it's going to be necessary for us to look up elements programmatically in Java. So, first of all, not every element needs ID. Just the ones that we care about need ID. Secondly, Eclipse is always going to put an ID on elements, and it's going to put like one of those default IDs. So often you're going to want to either remove them or rename them, right? So let me show you. And IDs almost pretty much always start with @+ID and then some unique identifier. Why is it a plus here? Because we had @string, it didn't say @+string. It's because @string was referring to another file where strings were statically defined. But here we're not going to have another file of IDs. When we say @+ID, blah, that means that we're dynamically right then and there creating an ID blah. It's not defined in another file like a string is. Right? So in other words, it's almost always @+ID /, right? But just if you kind of cared about why is a plus in there in the first place. And again, it's just my hypothesis on that, not the truth. Okay, so remember here's @string, we had @string and then some text. Okay, so back to this. So you can kind of see that Eclipse, see if ID is assigned, Eclipse gives it this default ID, edit text 01 and button 01. So edit text 01 tells me exactly nothing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find that ID and I'm going to change it. So as opposed to calling this @+ID edit text 01, I'm going to rename it to something that's a little more meaningful. And I use the same. Remember how my convention is to say what it is first, followed by the name. So I would call this edit status. So it tells me that it's an edit field, right? So I selected the middle box, the edit text, and I changed its ID to @+ID edit status. Like that. So far so good. So then button is going to be the same idea. Default is already there, button 01. I'm gonna change it to button update because that's what the button is, so I know which button it is. Because same, you in a medium-sized project, you're gonna end up with 20, 30, 50 of these IDs. So you also want some kind of way of naming them so that they're a little more obvious.
Must be unique or
Mhm.
must be unique, right?
It doesn't have to be unique, actually. It doesn't have to be unique. You could have the button update in different contexts and use the same name. You gotta be careful. I'll point this out later on. But when it comes to Java, it's an easy way to create a class cast exception because they're all type int. So when you try to cast it, Java sometimes it can't verify that. It's not. Android is sort of breaking some of the things that we're used to doing in Java. Like in Java, you used to clearly naming stuff. Well, Android kind of breaks some of those things. Okay. So that's sort of the problem with that. All right. So now that we have that, you can verify here that indeed it's called edit status and button update. Okay. So now we're pretty happy with this. We can do more cosmetic stuff like I said, but for now let's leave it. So let's switch over to Java. Let's assume we're done with this. So let's switch over to Java. So open up your status activity.java file. Okay, so everyone got that open? Okay, so if you remember our life cycle picture, we said this is a life cycle of an activity. At the beginning, it doesn't exist, and then it goes through these steps, and then finally, it's in a running state. So you get to configure it somewhere along these lines. You can fill in one of these blanks. So whereas you may not care about filling in all of these blanks, one that we almost always universally care is this guy on create. On create is sort of like almost always you have it. It's sort of like your init or your constructor. It's a good place to set stuff up, right? Make sense? So that's why in here we have on create already pre-configured to us, and again at this point it just calls a super, and then it sets the content view to that XML file which we just did. So it says do this points to that file there, right? R layout status XML, right? We talked about that already. So let me just explain this line 11. This line 11 actually does a lot of work, okay? It does a hell of a lot of work. So what this line 11 says, it says set the content for this activity to this layout. What that in turn does is it does what you would have done in AWT or Swing. It's equivalent of opening up. This is our XML file, by the way, that we worked on. And by the way, if you want to make it look pretty, you can go source, format, and that usually makes it a little prettier. Okay, just so that we can, because when you work on the other mode, you just kind of throw stuff together, right? But if you now look at it this way, I'll show you a whole bunch of useful commands, and Eclipse source format is one of them, or Control-Shift-F. Okay, so now, so this is our layout. This 14 lines of code. How many of you did AWT or Swing? Okay, so if you were building this in AWT or Swing, you would have to say button, my button equals new button, my button dot set text, my button dot set color, my button dot set ID, my button blah blah. Then so for each element you would have done that, right? In other words, it's the equivalent of, for each of these elements, creating a new Java object, 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 setting the property for that Java object, setting property for that Java object, setting a property for that Java object, setting a property for another Java object, another Java object, another Java, and so on and so on. In other words, these 14 lines of XML code would have been equivalent of 40, 50 lines of Java code. Make sense? So, what this line, this innocent little looking line here does, is it opens up that XML file pointed by this resource. So it knows, aha, we need to look at this XML file, opens it up and parses it. And for each element creates the object. For each attribute assigns a value to that property of that object. Then creates another object, adds it to the previous one if it's a child, right? And sets the appropriate attributes, and so on and so on. Right? So this loops through this entire text. That process is called inflating from XML. So we are inflating Java space, memory space, Java object tree, right, from XML. And that tends to be a little expensive because whenever you're creating objects, it's expensive. Mallocing is expensive, right? And so that's what happens there. So that line inflates XML. The point is, after this line of code, all those objects actually exist in Java memory space. In other words, XML is a throwaway, right? So XML is just there to help us to write code that then it's going to on the fly become Java code, and that XML is never seen again until next execution, right? So that's what happens, right? So we could have done all this without XML. It just XML makes it easier for us to write, right? So what that means that is now I have access to all those things in Java. So the ones that we care about are these: the edit text with ID edit status and the button with ID button update, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define them class globally, and then we're going to look them up, initialize them. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to define edit text, so edit status, and button update. Now, why are my edit text and button underlined red? Right, you need to import them. So you need to go look up what they're defined, figure out the package, and then go open up the import and import them. It's quite annoying. Solution to that is source organize imports, or Control-Shift-O. Bam, just figures it out, imports it, and hides it from you. Okay? Did you see that? It was lightning fast, man. Might have missed you. So I'm gonna undo it. So see how Eclipse even hides import from me because it's just noise, right? Okay. And see how this is missing? So in regular Java, if I was using Notepad or something, I would have to go look up where this is, and I would have to go import Android dot, and I have to now figure out which package and so forth, right? But since we're paying the price of using Eclipse, might as well use it. So what you can do is you can go source, organize imports. Bam. And it figures it out for you. Okay? And it even hides it back from you because it's not important. So far so good? So I'm not going to be like, whenever whenever we run into this in the future, I'll just do Control-Shift-O. You're not going to see it. Just bam, happens because it's a very quick little shortcut. Every once in a while it runs into an ambiguity because there's multiple multiple possible imports. I'll mention that because one such case is going to come soon. So I'll mention that when we get to it. Cool. So now that we have those two imported, we can now find it from the memory space. So there's a useful method that that helps us look up a view that's in the memory space by ID. It's called find view by ID. It's for any of you that are familiar with, anybody familiar with JavaScript, you know, find element by ID. It's very much the same thing. So my edit status is going to be edit text, and then you gotta type find view by ID. Or if you don't like typing, you can do control space and then start typing find, and there it is. Right? So just control space. And Eclipse figures out what's possible to type, right? And then it's going to be, ID is going to be r dot, and then look how R gives you options, and then you pick ID, and then you see a dot, and then it should find edit status right in there. In other words, wait after you press dot and select as opposed to type. So this whole thing looks like a long line, but don't type it, because then it just leads to typos. Right? So similarly for buttons, so button update is gonna be button, and then control space, find view by ID, r dot ID dot button update, bam, done. I'm not a fast typer, but just like use the completion, right? So far so good? Okay, so now we basically inflated our XML, and we found our XML from the Java memory space. That's what we've done. Okay. So our next thing to do would be to handle that button, to actually do something with that button, right? So how would you do this in a regular AWT or Swing? You add a listener, right? Yeah, so we're gonna do exactly the same thing here. That stuff looks pretty much the same. So what you're gonna notice is that other than that we're augmenting the Java with XML, it's pretty much back to AWT or Swing. So it's a very similar approach. It's just that as opposed to explaining what the button looks like in Java, which you can, we don't have to because we can inflate it from XML. That's the only difference, right? Okay, so I'm gonna say button update dot set on, and there it is, on click listener. You can just start typing set on and should find it, right? So question, how many of you are familiar how interfaces work in Java? Okay, interfaces, like you guys know how Java interfaces work and all that? Okay, inner classes, is that too strange of a word for some? Hmm?
No, not too strange.
Not too strange, I've heard it before. Okay, okay. I mean, it's not as bad. Like sometimes, like a lot of companies I go into, it's people who have just been doing C for their entire life. So, like even the word interface is very strange. So it's pretty standard. Okay, so what I'll show you like a nice little trick, and not trick, but the useful thing. So I need to. The way this works is we're saying button, when you get clicked, notifies somebody. Okay? So it's kind of like we're registering somebody with a button. We're saying button call this guy when you get clicked. That's how the mechanism works. Okay? Now, that this guy goes into here. We need to specify what that this guy is. But whoever it is needs to adhere to an interface, to a contract that says on-click listener. In other words, to be able to get a phone call that button got clicked, you gotta be somebody who is a click listener, somebody who's capable of listening to a click, meaning a Java interface. It needs to implement Java interface, right? So I have a couple of choices here. I could define a whole new class and make it implement that interface. I could define an anonymous inner class, make it really tight code, but really confuse the heck out of most of you. Okay. So out of all evils, the easiest, the least evil thing is to make status activity implement on click listener. Okay. So here's how it works. I'm gonna say call this. You know what this refers to, right? So this refers to the class itself, right? So when you say this, that means not class, but instance itself, to status activity, right? So I'm saying button, when you get clicked, call this, okay? And let it know that you got clicked. But rightly, Eclipse complains. It says, whoa, 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 this is not gonna work because this is not implementing that interface. Right? You can put your mouse over it and Eclipse tells you why it's not working in a kind of very encrypted language. The method set on click listener in type view is not applicable, blah blah blah. Right? But that's what it means. It says, you know what, like whoever it goes in the parentheses needs to be on click listener. So what you can do is you can go in this list of quick fixes and pick the last one on the list, which is basically says let status activity implement on click listener, right? So what that does is check it out. Check the top right corner of my code. So as I click on that, oops, see how it added this implements on click listener. So Eclipse fixed my code. Now this, which refers to status activity, indeed does say that it implements on click listener. Okay? I didn't type it, that just got typed in, right? However, we now have a second problem. It's nice that we say we implement something, but we don't really. Here we're just stating yes, we are compliant, but we're not yet fully compliant. To be fully compliant, you go and you put your mouse on the second problem, on the new problem, and you say add unimplemented methods. And that now makes you compliant by actually providing what it means to be a listener, which means to have an on-click method. Okay, I'm going to do this once again because I know it gets a little confusing. So first I said button set on click listener. So set the guy who listens to you to this. Eclipse said this doesn't compile because this is not a valid listener. So I put the mouse over that. I pick the last one on the list. Set on let status activity implement on click listener. So I click on that. That adds this to it, but it's still not valid because it says I just saying that I implement something doesn't really make me implement something, right? It's like I can claim to be a banker, but if I didn't go to the bank school, I'm not and don't have a certificate, I'm not really a banker, right? So this guy is just claiming to be a listener, but it's not really being a listener. To be a listener means it must implement on click. So now you go here and you say add unimplemented interface methods, and bam, it adds this here. And it even creates a little to-do, right? Do you guys know how these to-dos work? I ignore them, but there's a feature, there's a window, and whenever you miss a window, you go into Windows, and it's called task list. So if you cared about that, it shows you all the tasks that you have outstanding. So if you have a little to-do like this, it becomes actually something that goes into the task list automatically. Okay. Or, huh? Window show view, but yeah, I don't use that, so I just ignore it. So I usually, you know, on a bigger project it may make sense, but for education I just delete that, right?
So for the quick listener, is it I guess cleaner to do it with an anonymous in a class, or is it better to do it this way? It doesn't matter.
It doesn't really matter. Anonymous inner classes is one of those things that it's a religious belief, right? And there's nothing you can do about changing people's minds about that. About 50% people think that that's the worst thing ever happened to Java. It totally breaks all the rules of like object orientation, this and that. The other 50% of people think that that's such a nice time-saving convenience, right? Just for those of you who are not familiar with that, I'm just going to really quickly do this the opposite way, and then I'll rewind it to this. But basically, if I need the listener here, I need a class that's capable of being a on-click listener. So what I can do is I can implement a class here, new on-click listener, right? And what I can do is now say. So like this, and then say add unimplemented methods. And what I'm doing is I'm adding a brand new class here without a name, instantiating it and defining it all in once. So it's very you know, in a way you can say it's clean because I just need a little something to drop in right in here, and that's what what this does.
Yeah, that big though is unreadable.
But it makes it somewhat unreadable, especially to people who are like newer to Java, or you know, like you guys are usually getting just a refresher on Java and so on. So that's why we'll be seeing code like this, and the reason why I need to explain it is because you're going to be running into other people's code, because it's quite often like this, right? But for now, I'm going to rewind it to the previous less evil, which is make this be a listener. Click here, say add, make it a listener, bam, and then say here add unimplemented, bam, and now we have a placeholder to do some stuff.
Maybe it looks like it's a difference in your Android version and our Android version, because ours the interface asks you to implement two methods, on click with two signatures. There's one view and another one is dialog interface. And
Oh, you might have clicked.
Cast the view back, cast back the.
What do you have under imports? You probably imported it could have collided on something, and it imported a wrong. It imported a dialog on-click listener, right? Yeah. So just delete it and click Control-Shift-O again, and it will say, okay, I have a conflict, which one? And pick a view over instead of dialog. Yeah, so that could have happened because of the class path issues. Okay, so you know I can run this at any point, you know, just to kind of see that it's running. It's not really gonna do much at this point, but I just want to show you. You know, of the interest of keeping it whole and complete at all times. There it is, boom, right? And I can say something, hello. Click on update, nothing happens, right? You know, it's like we're building this organically, small steps, in small increments, you know, constantly winning. But so it may not do much all the time, but at least we're feeling good. Like, look, it's an app, it's working, right? Okay, so everyone got that? You can compile it, you can run it, and it kind of works.
Last time you said run as, and it showed me Android app, right? This time it didn't show me.
What does it show you? Let me see. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to gather the value from the button, and we're going to log it. Okay, and then we're going to see how the log file works. So I'm going to simply say string status is going to be edit status dot get text. You may have to say toString because get text returns you an editable. Okay, that's how I get the string that was typed into the box. I simply ask the widget, the edit status, to get its text and convert it to string. Okay. So far so good? Okay, so I want to show you how to log now. You know, we're building this incrementally, so we don't have to do gigantic steps. So we're going to do small incremental steps. So one step I want to do next is I want to just log this to a log file and introduce the log system to you as well. So there's something called log, and you can specify then the severity level. So you can do log.v for verbose, log.i for info, log.e for error, log.d for debug. There's actually even a log.wtf, and it doesn't stand for what you think it stands. It stands for what a terrible failure.
Oh, really?
Yes, and I'm not making this stuff up. And it's an error that should never have happened, okay? So,
That's
how,
the guy who wrote it.
Yeah.
Something cool.
how appropriate. I'm not making this stuff up. So, in other words, we're just now going to say .d for debug, right? And you simply say a tag and a message. So a tag could be anything. I usually use for a tag like the name of my class. So it may be something like status activity. It's just something that makes sense to you. It's just a tag, so you can look it up later on, right? And then the message is just a message, you know, on click with status plus status. It doesn't really matter, some kind of message. Now, when you do Control-Shift-O, this time around, you're almost guaranteed to get a conflict because there are multiple logs available, right? Just like you got probably with the dialog. So when you guys get this, you're kind of gonna use your own common sense. So is this a log from Android util log or from Apache common logging? Yeah, this is Android. We're not using Apache. Just somewhere it collided on my class path. So that's why, you know, it's Android.
What's the difference?
It's totally different. Like Apache has its own class log that is used for its own stuff. Yeah. So it's just that they use the same name. So Android so Eclipse says, okay, you want me to import, but I found two in the same name. Which one? I don't know which one, right? So. So far, so good? Okay. So, save it, and so save it, run it, reinstalling it, bam, bam. Okay. So now what we have is we have it here. And if I say hello, click on update, okay, presumably it worked, or it either worked or it didn't. We don't know yet. So we need to now figure out how to read a log file. Everyone kind of got something that they typed? Okay. So let's figure out the log file. So as with most tools, there are sort of two approaches to a tool. One is via Eclipse, the other one is command line. Okay, so you can use these tools that ship with SDK. They're all SDK tools, but they're just Eclipse gives you sort of Eclipse interface to that versus a command line. So let me show you Eclipse first. So Eclipse has a tool called Logcat. It's actually an Android system called Logcat that has all the log information. In Eclipse, you can view it via Logcat window. Now, this Logcat window, you could open it by going to Window, Show View, yada yada. However, it's already probably open under a different perspective. So Eclipse, because it's got zillion and one thing that it can show you, as opposed to showing everything at one screen, which wouldn't fit, you would need a very large screen, right? What it does is it organizes things into something called perspectives. So you guys should have a DDMS perspective here. If you do not, then click on the little plus and see if you have it here, because maybe this is not big enough, right? If you still don't, then go other and then find DDMS perspective there. Okay? But whichever way it takes you to open it initially, click on the DDMS perspective and it should open up this other perspective. So far so good? So in this other perspective you should have something called Logcat right there. And it should show you a whole bunch of stuff. If you guys still,
Look at the bottom of the screen.
yeah, sometimes Logcat is at the bottom like this, hiding, like that. So what you can do is you can expand it, because I don't like it like down here. It's really hard to read stuff in those 3 mini lines, right? So what I would do is I would take it and I would drag it out here and make it big. We can drag those windows around, right? Try it. Yeah, there are a lot of messages, but we're looking for the one we filtered under status activity.
So how do we get the filter window up here?
So let me show you. So for example, what I could do is I could now filter based on specific either verboseness. So for example, I can say only debug messages, or only info messages, or only warnings, or only errors, right? So those would be different ways that I could look it up here, right? Or what you can do is you can click on the little plus, and then you can create a new filter. And I could create a filter called, for example, status activity. And my tag that and you can filter based on tag, PID, or something else. And I'll filter based on tag status activity. And boom, there it is.
Somehow my Logcat is empty.
Yeah, so if your Logcat is empty, you may not have selected the device. So make sure you click on the device here. Now you have it? Yeah.
Filter by activity.
Yeah, well, it's not. It's based on the tag. So whatever you use to tag in here, but I happen to use the name of my activity. Okay, let me take a look. Let me show you how to look at the Logcat from the command line. So here's how we're gonna do it from a command line. Control C. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do ADB ADB Logcat, and this now gives me a Logcat from via command line. So ADB space Logcat is one of the ADB subcommands. You saw ADB shell earlier, so you can do ADB Logcat. So if I say update, see how there's status update right here. Okay. So I tend to I tend to prefer using Logcat on a command line because I can just keep running it as a tail in the background, and it works really well. Versus switching back and forth in Eclipse, for some reason on a Mac it's really non-responsive. Like it takes forever to switch back and forth. Right? However, if you wanted to create a filter on a command line, you could look in the documentation and it tells you that you say tag column what. So for example, it would say something like status activity column star, right? That's what the documentation will tell you. But that still gives you everything. So what took me a little while to figure out that you also have to tell it what not to give you. So you say star silence. And that's not very obvious. So you got to tell it what you do want to listen to, so tag column severity, but at the same time you got to tell it what you don't want to listen to, which is severity, tag column severity. So all the tags, silence all the tags other than the tags status activity show everything. It's a little convoluted, I think, but it works pretty well once you get that.
So can I redirect this to a separate log file because I just want to use the whole, right? If it has to do with maybe the data.
I don't really know. I mean, you could create some kind of pipe, or you could pipe this then.
No, not this output. I mean, even from where I was logging.
Well, it's logging.
Log framework doesn't give me any flexibility of filing. Right?
No, not really. I mean, where it's logging is going to a file on a system partition which you don't have access to as a developer. Cool. So, so you guys want to post this to the internet? Okay. So what we want to do is we now want to post this to the internet. Okay. We have the text. We are ready to post it. We need a library. We need to make a web service call. Okay, and we would need to figure out what the API for Twitter is, right? So you could go and you would figure out what the Twitter API is, or you could use a third-party library that is already packages this for you. So what I did is I used this third-party library called JTwitter. So it's basically just a plain old Java library, nothing to do with Android, right? Just a plain old Java library that basically, does the mumbo-jumbo encoding on the URL for Twitter API back and forth, so that we are not wasting time on stuff that is just Java, has nothing to do with valuable Android learning, right? So. And it kind of tells you how to do that. You say Twitter, create new Twitter, and then you can say Twitter.setStatus. Okay. However, their library was broken, so I fixed it and I told them what the problem was. But I don't think that they have updated it. So as opposed to downloading it from them, you should download it from me. Okay. First of all, are we on the same network? Are you? Can you guys hold on? Can you guys see the following IP address? So 128.107.12.167. I suspect not, but I just want to give it a shot. You can?
This is the guest network, right? I guess.
Yeah. Are you guys on a guest network? You cannot? Okay, that's fine. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to find that zip file. I have it code. Let me see, Yamba 7, it doesn't really matter which one. I'll take this jar file and I'm going to copy it. Copy. And I'm going to put it in my Yamba project here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to upload it to this place. Hold on 1 second, I'll tell you exactly where you can get it from. So here is where the file is. So try to download it from here. And save it in your project, so in your Yamba directory. Don't unzip it. It is a zip file, so don't unzip it. Just save it in the root of your directory.
I'm getting redirect to some other website.
Yeah, it's redirecting you to some GS7
I'm never doing.
Deutsch.
Maybe you just made it.
It's fine.
You are Ubuntu?
Yeah, Ubuntu is redirecting you some case.
Huh. Make sure you type it properly. Let me see. But you know what? Let me just drop it on a USB key and pass it that way. When everything else fails, that's
I'm
what
not sure I can access it in Ubuntu. So
that's what got crazy USB keys for. Okay.
Where do you want us to put this?
Put it in the root, so it should be like this in your project. So if you have your project Yamba, it should be right there, where everything else is. Alright, so and then in Eclipse, you should, in your project, because Eclipse doesn't know that you just drop something into a project, you should right click on your project and say refresh. And I'll pass it on to you as well. So you should just refresh it and add it to your project. Got it? I love Windows. Do you want to restart it now? Do you know this is unsafe? Do you want to download some sample applications?
Can you mail it to me too?
yeah, that's what we are on VM, so USB to VM.
Oh, from you? Oh, you don't?
Yeah.
Oh, you don't know? There's a anyway.
That's
Sure.
Can't I SCP? I have an IP, right? So I should be able to
Yeah, you can.
I can mail it to you.
But I can't even see your drive.
Hold on. Where's the? Let me show you. Where's the user of the virtual machine?
The, he's going to mail it to me. I can mail it to you.
So in the VM, you can
You
say
can open it.
virtual machine.
email.com.
So you can see that your
I'm not getting any idea that's around from
Try WWIM.
Try what?
WWIM.
Oh, you mean system? Yeah. Let's see.
I just figured I have an IP on this computer.
yeah. Well, yeah. I don't know. I don't know exactly what that is. I mean, normally in a VM, it just shows you you can add, but
Thank you. Got it.
you got it.
Can you forward it to me?
Yeah.
So everyone else got it? Anybody else needs it on USB? No? Okay, so you guys added here. So we're almost done. So now what you need to do is you need to tell Eclipse to add this into your project. Okay. So here's what we're going to do. Right click on your project, click on properties, and then say under Java build path, libraries, click on add jar, and then find a jar. So again, so you click on the properties of this then go Java build path, library, and then add a jar.
If it doesn't find it, should we do external jars?
And what's that?
Sometimes it doesn't find it.
Well, that's why I did a refresh first of
Yeah, I
this.
do too. It's
You can, yeah. So you can, yeah. That's weird. Yeah, try external jar. That's fine
you
too.
drop it to the root, right?
Yeah, or you can just drag and drop it into the project, or you can just copy it and then click on refresh, and then it should find it. Right, it should see it in there. So that's how you add external libraries to a project, right? That's basically what we're doing. We're adding an external library to this project.
So it goes at resources.
Hmm?
It goes at resources.
No, it does not go in resources. It goes in the root of your project. It should not be in your resources, actually.
So how do you copy it to the open?
No, I emailed it to you.
Yeah, so
Email.com,
yeah,
download it.
okay.
So you can open the email from within Google.
Yeah. You guys have a weird setup. Normally, it's easy from Ubuntu to mount the USB.
So after refresh, what's the next step?
So you right click on your project and you click on properties. Okay. And then you click Java build path, libraries, add jars, and then you add it. You find it and you add it. So ultimately you're gonna have it in here. That just basically adds it to the class path so the Java compiler can find it.
I just put it anywhere in the workspace or
Inside of your project. It needs to go inside of your project. So just drop it in your Yamba directory. That's the root of your project.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, so right click then on your project and say, properties, Java build path, libraries, add jars. Let me know when you guys got it.
project is again what is the reference to the project? Build path?
Java build path, libraries, add jars.
You should see that Java in there, right?
Yeah.
No, I don't see that. Why do you
Try refreshing
Refresh. And then refresh.
refreshing the project?
The Java is called JTwitter, right? So here it is IP construct.
So JTwitter is the name of the library. That's just the name of the library. The object we're using is Twitter. Yeah. That's just what they what they named it. So. And at this point, so this establishes the connection to that online service. And now I should be able to do something like twitter.setStatus, and then I can say status. Right? That's our status that we have. So so far so good? Okay. So now you can run it. So it's installing it. Everything should compile. You can run it. Don't forget to Control-Shift-O when you add Twitter, right? Because it needs to import it, right? You can run it, and what's gonna happen when I say hello from building? Let's see. What?
It should show up on your website, but it's getting socket exceptions. Is that it?
Yeah.
It should crash. Okay, it should crash.
What does force close here mean?
Well, you don't have any other option.
You're telling them never to restart it, or what does
No,
it
that
mean?
means force close it. It doesn't really do anything other than it's already closed. Our app is already done, right? So my point was that when you see that message, let me create that message again. So if I run it, that's exactly, yeah. So when this message has a very simple meaning, so hello, you click on that. What this message says, let's read it together. It says, read the logcat. Okay, so whenever you see this message, you don't think about it. You just go automatically and you read the logcat. Okay, that's what it says. You don't have to use your brain. Say, okay, I got to read the logcat, because that's where the answer really truly is. And now, what I like about Java is that it's very verbose and easy to find the answer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say adb logcat to run my logcat, bam. And see, in Java, it's really easy to eyeball your exceptions. So here's how you read it. You go to the bottom of your logcat. You then go up until you find the beginning of your exception. It's easy to find it because you can eyeball the white space, right? Bam. Okay, so that's where my exception starts. Right? It's right here. Okay, Twitter, exception, Java, net, socket exception, permission denied. Okay, so what do you think is the problem? No, it's actually okay. Fair enough. It's possible to think that that's username and password. It's
You haven't told your application to use the internet.
exactly. So we don't have a permission to use the internet. I don't have permission to use the internet. So whenever your app, let's take a look at the permissions because we haven't discussed that. I wanted to crash it first and then talk about it. So basically, whenever your app tries to do something that's potentially dangerous, right? Like read right to your file system, read your contacts, send SMSs, make phone calls, connect online, access sensitive data, whatever that is, the application needs to own, it has to have that permission. The way it works is you as a developer, you say in application, I need these permissions, right? Then when the user downloads the application, the user is prompted at install time, do you grant the permissions to this app that it needs? So it's up to a user to say yeah or nay. It's yeah everything or nay nothing, right? So if a user grants his permission only, then the application gets installed and then has those permissions. So what we must ask for those permissions. Okay, so here's how you ask for it. You open up the manifest file because all that meta stuff goes in the manifest file. You can go under permissions tab. Let's do it via the tab. Okay, you'll click on add, and it's not permission, but it's uses permission. So you add uses permission because we're not adding a new permission, we're adding a request for a permission. We're asking for a permission. We're not defining a permission, we're asking to use an existing one, right? So you say okay, and now in this pull down you find a permission called internet. So Android permission internet.
What if you don't have any permissions instead?
That's on Ubuntu. Huh. You need to do it manually. Ubuntu doesn't, for this pull down also doesn't work, right? It doesn't work for you guys.
Actually, I couldn't find the internet. I couldn't. Yeah.
Huh. Okay. Worst comes to worst, you open it up in Notepad, whatever, right? And you just basically need to you need to type in this. Let me do it like this. Yeah, you just need to type in this. So uses permission, blah blah blah. You can use. By the way, if you're lazy in typing, you can also do this in XML. You can do control space uses. There. Control space. Oops. Control space. Oh, it doesn't work here. Okay, Android name. And then you type it in. So now when you guys retype that, you rerun it, and if everything is nice and dandy, yeah. So far so good? Okay. You get it? Hello from building C. Click on update.
Unauthorized HTTP. So, yeah. I guess that
Yeah, so that's what it sounds like. So let me open up my hold on. Let me open up my. If I go here and I click on refresh, and it says mine worked a few seconds ago.
Yours
Oh, that's mine worked through the while button got accepted. But this is Sujata.
Which one is yours?
The third one.
Oh, okay. I don't know. Let me see if I got an exception. I got an exception too. And let's see. No, I didn't. That's an old exception.
No, but it's almost like it's trying to talk to some other link, account rate limit status, and that's where the exception comes from.
Oh, account rate limit status. That happens.
Maybe because I did 2 or 3 times. You know.
Yeah.
Limit
Yes.
the rate of messages from this account.
Built-in sort of
Yeah.
mechanism. So if you try to submit the same message multiple times, it's gonna fail. So change the message and it should not fail. Yeah. And this is just our very first version, so we don't have a lot of error handling or anything like that.
What is the installation error? Install failing insufficient storage?
Okay, let me take a look at that. So the permission that we want is the Android permission internet. Okay, so if I refresh this, let's see. So it looks like a bunch of, many of you have had successful posts, right? Still getting an error? Let me look. Okay, so seems like for many of you it's working, right? I mean, we can see that a bunch of posts are posted. So that's a good, right? So that means that it's working. Is anybody still having any problems? You now know. So what you should know now, by now, what we've done so far is we talked about how to create a simple user interface, right? So what we've done is we defined the simple user interface. We said, there are a bunch of widgets. For each widget, you care about layout width, layout height, first and foremost. And then if you need to find it programmatically, you need to define the ID, right? We also said you outsource strings into a separate file called strings.xml. And then once you have all this nice and dandy in XML, you eventually switch to Java. In Java, you define Here, let me close this first so you can see it. So you define those elements, then you look them up, right? After you inflated the view. So that's what we did so far on this. And then we attached the listener to our button, okay? And then we did something for the button. So what we did for the button is we simply, created a new instance of Twitter, and we set the root API for it because we're not using Twitter, and then we said set status, and this does the actual network call and posts it to the network call. Okay. So far so good on that.
So how do you stop this?
How do you stop it?
The activity.
You can't. Well, I mean, to have it stopped, you simply leave the screen. So bam, now it's stopped. In other words, in a stop state.
How do you destroy it?
You don't.
Okay.
Yeah. Hmm?
I have to close Eclipse.
No, not Eclipse, the device.
I mean the running thing.
Yeah, you turn off your phone. I mean, you can use the task, on some devices you have the task manager, and you can ask the system to kill it. It may or may not, right? But it's not, why would you want to stop it? Right? I mean, why would you want to destroy it, in other words? Yeah. Okay. So, any questions on stuff we've done so far? Okay. So we're going to stop with this for now in terms of the new stuff, right? We said we're going to leave the last hour, and we only have like half an hour actually left. But I wanted to, I want to see, is there any questions on stuff we've done so far? Okay. Because we more cosmetic stuff certainly that we can do to this. I just wanted to kind of get it nice and dandy and working, so you can actually verify that it's working. You have a little application, it's actually collecting the data, making a network call, and posting that data somewhere, right? So what we're going to do is tomorrow we're going to pick up with this where we left off, and we're going to cover the graphic stuff as a refresher. So it's a good way to kind of pick up.
So the app that we picked here on the Twitter app, you have these 3 pages, but they don't really talk to each other, right? They only talk to the cloud. Can you just modify the app so we make like a flow from one page to another, whether it's like an intermediate object or something the same. So that will be like a good exercise if that works.
Well, they do. So you're talking about the actual project. They do talk to each other, right? But the things are loosely coupled. So the way, see, I mean, this guy does send to this guy to start it up.
Right.
This guy does write stuff into a file system, which this guy then reads from the file system, right?
What was he putting in the preference again?
Preference is username and password is going to be there.
Okay, so right now we did the status, right?
Yes.
And we put the username and password there.
Yes, we hard coded it in here.
Oh.
So right now you can't sell this application because nobody can change their username and password.
Exactly.
So next, what we're going to do is we're going to create another screen, which we're going to launch from this screen. We're going to say start that screen, and so on. So they will talk to each other. Yeah. Does it make sense? So these components are loosely coupled. They are independent, just like a web pages on a website are independent. You can enter a website through that page or this page, but they do share data. So they share data in multiple ways. What we're going to do, we're going to see how that works. They're going to be sending intents among themselves. They're going to be using the common application object to share the data and functionality. They share the data by sharing it. For example, this one writes it to the file system. This one reads it from, the database. That's another way of sharing the data. So they do talk, quote unquote, with one another, yeah. But that's sort of also how you design stuff. You keep it loosely coupled collection of things, of main building blocks.